and welcome to our podcast called Heart Talk. This is Wajiha and my co-host Shahzeb. And today's folktale is called Sohni Mahiwal. Now, Sohni Mahiwal is a folktale that's popular across Sindh and Punjab. In Sindh, it's been popularized by Shah Abdul Latif Bhittai, who has referred to Sohni as one of the 7 heroines in his Shahjo Risalo. It's written by many poets in Punjab as well, both here in Pakistan and across the border. It's sung mostly. Shahzeb, you're going to tell us a little bit more about Sohni Mahiwal. Where does the scene start?
Sure. Out of all the tales that we have looked at and we are covering today, this one is unique because it's about infidelity in some ways.
Really? Is that what you took out of it?
Well,
we will discuss that later.
Discuss it, right?
Just stay tuned.
Stay tuned. And we might have some disagreements about it, which is fine too. But yeah, let's start the story. So it's the story takes place on the banks of, we think, River Chenab in Punjab. And there's a village. There's a man who lives there. He's a potter. He has a beautiful daughter called Sohini. So he makes these clay-baked various pots. She paints them. They're really popular. And once upon a time, there's a caravan that's going from Bukhara to Delhi. And in that caravan, there's a man named Izzat Beg. The caravan stops there at the village. Izzat Beg goes and buys some pots from there. He sees Sohini and falls in love with her. He finds excuses to be near her, close to her, to see her, and keeps returning to buy the pot.
He's a stalker.
Well,
that's what we'll say that in today's time.
She responds, by the way. So that's why we can't call
consent.
Yeah, there is some consent there.
That's important.
So he keeps returning. He's buying these pots and then selling them cheap. He's not really interested in the pots, right? He's interested in her. But he's a merchant, which means he should be selling them for profit. But as he falls for her, he doesn't care about his trade, his profit, and he starts to lose money. He then decides to stay there. He tells the caravan people, you guys carry on, but I'm going to stay here. He obviously loses money and starts working for her dad as a buffalo herder. And that's why he's called Mahiwal, so keeper of the cows. They have a love affair. She obviously responds to him. Pretty soon the family finds out. Her dad finds out. He's enraged. Ke ye kya ho raha hai? Meri izzat matti mein mila di type scene. And he says, iska ek hi hal hai, ladki ki shaadi kar do. So there is another potter from Kumhar caste. And he marries her off. It is a forced marriage because obviously she's in love with Izzat Beg, or Mahiwal as we will call him. He is obviously very dejected, and he then decides to settle across the river. So he's not in the same village but near her, and he becomes a fakir, and he's a Mahiwal. The love affair continues even after the match.
Scandalous.
Scandalous from the point of view of the society and the family, but they can't live without each other. So he usually swims across the river to come and meet her. And that's when there's a twist in the story, which you are going to tell me about.
Right. So obviously they live across the river. Sohni lives on one side, Mahiwal is on the other side. Now, Sohni usually crosses across the river to meet him at night. This is when everyone's sleeping, and she secretly goes to see him. She takes a pot because she's married into a potter family. So she carries a pot and she floats on the pot, which I thought was a really great, probably one of the earliest scientific inventions of how to make a float.
It's a floaty.
It's like a float. So she just carries the pot, and across the river Chenab, she travels to see him every night. She spends the night, they spend the night, and she returns back to her husband's place. Her sister-in-law has been observing this. And obviously, it's against the honor of the family. So everyone is upset. Her sister-in-law is pretty upset that this is what she's been doing. She also has a guru, a teacher, a spiritual teacher who tells her, you know, Sohni, you're married now. You have someone else now. You cannot keep going to see your lover. This is just not right. But, you know, Sohni says, okay, fine, I'm going to stop. I won't do this. So Sohni is always in a dilemma whether I should go meet him or not, you know, and that's, you know, an important part of the story of her crossing across the river to see her lover. One night, the river tides are extremely rough, really, really high tide, the river Chenab. And, you know, but she's still thinking of him. She's still preparing to go see him because Mahiwal can't come see her. So she wants to go across on the pot. Her sister-in-law has observed this across many days. So she decides to replace the baked pot with an unbaked clay pot. And her guru also sees her and he says, you know, you're going again. She says, you know, you are my guru. Even if God were to say, do not go see my lover, I will still go meet him. So she defies all logic, all rationality. The river tides are high. She knows she could drown and she decides to cross the river. Of course, this is an unbaked pot, and during her journey, she starts to drown because the pot breaks. And she starts crying and she starts screaming for Mahiwal, and unfortunately she doesn't make it and she drowns in the river. Mahiwal's on the other side. He hears her like weeping, crying for her, and he realizes that she's gone and he is heartbroken and he jumps in the river and they both die. So that's the tragic ending of Sohni Mahiwal. So I'd love to ask you actually, you know, we've been doing all these folk tales, reading them. A lot of them suddenly start to sound similar to each other. But what is it about Sohni Mahiwal that you found different, or what fascinated you?
So she's obviously torn, as you said, and there's a dilemma that she faces. She's conflicted. She's torn, obviously, between her husband and the lover. And they represent two very different things. Her husband represents logic, rationality, status quo, establishment, tradition, convention, for example, doing the right thing. He represents day, but her lover represents night, because at night she goes to meet him. Mahiwal represents ecstasy, bliss, fulfillment of heart, desire, and she's torn between the two. And she manages to tread both paths for a while. You know, during the day she's in her village doing her thing, and at night she sneaks off, right? So that is interesting, and we come across often in our lives where we have a path to choose.
A fork in the road.
Yeah, one seemingly is reckless, other one is safe. And most of us are encouraged to take the safer path. And those who take the reckless path, stakes are high. You don't know whether you will make it or not, whether you will end up hurt or dead in this case. And yet, she takes that plunge on that night when she knows the river is rough, chances of her survival are low. Should I, shouldn't I, aar ya par, and it's that choice she has to make. And I think for me, in this story, obviously she's a rebel. She makes a choice, and she takes the plunge. If she hadn't done that, there would be no story. It's because, you know, because she decides to take that plunge, which makes Sohini that character that men, you know, across our land are singing. There's poetry. We've seen so many YouTube videos. You know, all these men really like praising Sohini for her courage, right? Even though in society, you know, this is a point we were making earlier, if you see it as infidelity and a cheating wife, what do men do typically? They will take care of the honor, and
they'll probably kill her,
throw acid on her, whatever. And yet in our tradition and poetry, she lives on as this character who went with her heart, and not be limited by her finite mind. So I thought that was kind of quite interesting.
And you also said that, you thought it was about infidelity, and I was, curious to ask you actually why or how you would call it infidelity, because at one hand, Sohni and Mahiwal, are actually in love with each other.
Yeah.
He's been her true love. She's always wanted to be with him. They've professed their love for each other.
Yeah.
And yet she's forcefully married off into someone else's family, but she wants to be with him. So is it really infidelity if everyone knows that these two are meant to be together? She knows that she's meant to be with him. And in such a case, how would you call it a story about infidelity?
So looking at it from her husband's point of view, when I was delving into the story, I was saying, what has he done to deserve this? I mean, yes, the father says, कि भाई ये तो इसकी शादी करा दो, and he says, I'll marry her, only to find out that her heart belongs somewhere else. Now, if this happened today to a man, and you come to this realization, you will say, okay, let's get a divorce. And if you are a reasonable man, if you are our typical man, then you would bound her, you will deny her things, you will deny her freedom, you will punish her, you will make her miserable, you maybe even attack her or kill her. But the decent thing would be to say, if we are not meant to be together,
And it's interesting that Sohni's sister-in-law actually takes that decision to replace the pot. So, it's a female character who, tries to turn the tide in a way and is actually responsible in some.
So yeah, she's the villain who carries out the villainous
Not
act.
necessarily the husband, which is interesting, which is why possibly you feel sorry for him.
So I do feel sorry for him.
And perhaps he represents this, because of course we'll talk about the spiritual, mystical meaning, and it's about struggle.
Yeah.
So if you look at it from his side, perhaps that's the challenge that he has to go through to get to the other side.
Yeah, but in the story they don't really deal with him.
They don't really deal.
He's he's kind of a side character. And I felt that if you were to kind of look at the story from his side, then he suffers because he's caught up in somebody else's mess in a way, which happens a lot of times. You've got nothing to do with the situation, and you are just there, redundant basically. But talking about the spiritual meaning, what did you get out of this? This whole thing about dilemma and following your heart or following your mind, did it resonate with you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we deal with these decisions and these dilemmas all the time in our life. What is the right path to take for your own self? And in some ways, it's really about, I think the story is about trusting your own self or your own inner voice. You're constantly thinking, is this right for me? But I think the actual message is that if your belief is strong enough, if your faith in yourself is strong enough, and of course, in a spiritual sense, it kind of is connecting to your belief in God, that to get to Him, you have to completely submit and surrender, and to find peace in what you do to make any decision, even if it's perhaps not necessarily the safest one. If you have a strong belief, you'll survive. And in this case, to survive means to drown in the physical sense. But I think the drowning actually in a spiritual sense means to, be drowned in the eternal love or realization of God and this universe and our soul's eventual union with God. So I think that that's why the unbaked pot is really interesting, because even there's a lot of poetry about when she wants to cross the river. She tells the pot, she's actually praying to the pot, ke, take me across the river safely, So Pathan Khan has sung this, and there's a verse, Sohni ghade nu aakhdi, aj mainu yaar mila ghadya. Sohni ghade nu, she's saying to the ghada, Aj menu yaar mila ghadya. Kiਵੇਂ mila Mahiwal nu, dariya zoran da aj chadya. Dariya zoran da aj chadya. Yani ke today the tide is really high. So she's kind of saying to the pot, take me across, except if you're not ready, which is the unbaked pot. Kacha agar ghada hoga, you'll never be able to cross. So it comes back to, again, actually being really firm in yourself, in your belief. And only when you are ready, in a way it's like a catch-22, you'll be able to make it to the other side.
So, Sur Sohini, Shah Latif's, in Shah Latif's poetry, is one of those surs which is sung late at night or pre-dawn. That's the time the lovers met, right? They did not meet during the day. They did not want to be seen. It was a secret affair. And the sur evokes sensuous longing, right? But like you said, it has a spiritual meaning. And I'll just read translation of a couple of verses. Exactly what you were talking about, the dilemma. Neither here nor there. Poor girl is in the thick of it. He awaits on the other bank. Swirls of water engulf her. Dive deeper. Don't think. He's kind to those who drown. So exactly what you were saying, that you have to immerse yourself. A lot of people play safe. We stand by the banks of a river or ocean and we just dip our feet, testing waters. We all have the longing to go across, but few of us take that chance because we are scared.
And that could be in anything, right? In your own journey in life. Where do I go with my career? Where do I go with, marriage? Where do I go with any important decision? We often forget to learn to listen to our heart. And we were discussing this. I really loved what you said about how we're discussing all these stories of the heart, but when we go back into the world, we start operating through the head.
Yeah. I mean, this is us taking up time out to explore matters of heart. But after we end this recording and we go away to our pragmatic self, and it's very unfortunate because we are born and we live in part of the world where we have a rich heritage and culture, and that's why we are talking about some of these things, to really evoke some curiosity, to familiarize ourselves with it, and to explore, to delve a little bit deeper. You talked about drowning, and Shah Latif also says, those who plunge emerge. That's how it's always been. Submit to the rampant river and meet with Mehar or Mahar. And so it makes sense to me that you have to submit, you have to immerse yourself, you have to take your chances. Are we brave enough? Are we fearless enough, like Sohini, to do this? I think many of us are actually cowards. We freeze when the time comes to decide because we are afraid. We take the easy way out. We live in denial. There are things before us, but we live in denial because there's a defense mechanism. I don't want to get hurt, or I don't want to get hurt again.
And it's somewhat also about living in this, like you said, denial, but this illusion of this world, which perhaps helps us get past in this world, So in a way, Sohni, when she realizes that she wants to be with Mahiwal, it's at night when her consciousness really emerges and she wants to be with him. So there are certain times or moments in your life where you have these awakenings, but they could be fleeting. But if you're not in tune with yourself, those moments might slip.
We will do one more episode, but before we kind of end, I have to ask you if you can give us a taster for many of our viewers, listeners who have not heard the story, not heard the music and the songs, to maybe, sing us something from this particular tape.
Sure. So I've prepared a little bit of one of the most popular versions It's been sung a lot in the folk tradition of Punjab and of course Sindh as well. But I don't know if many people know that this particular version is from Coke Studio, and it was sung by Noori and Shilpa Rao, this fantastic singer from India. Okay. पार चन्ना दे दिसे खुली यार दी खड़िया घड़िया आवे घड़िया पार चन्ना दे दिसे खुली यार दी खड़िया घड़िया आवे घड़िया रात हनेरी नदी ठाठा मार दी अड़िए अड़िए आनी अड़िए हो पार चना दे दिसे खुली यार दी खड़िया घड़िया आवे घड़िया कच्ची मेरी मिट्टी कच्चा मेरा नाम नी कच्ची मेरी मिट्टी कच्चा मेरा नाम नी हाँ मैं नाकाम नी कच्चे आंदा होंदा कच्चा अनजाम नी ए गल हाम नी कच्चियां ते रखिए ना उम्मीद पार दी अड़िए अड़िए हानी अड़िए ओ पार चना दे तिसे कुल्ली यार दी घड़िया घड़िया आवे घड़िया।
वाह ज़बरदस्त। सो कच्चे घड़े से उम्मीद ना लगाओ,
बिल्कुल
वो टूट जाएगा, आप सिंक
हाँ,
हो जाओगे।
बिल्कुल उससे उम्मीद ना रखें। और वो कह रहा है कि कच्ची मेरी मिट्टी कच्चा मेरा नाम नी हाँ मैं नाकाम नी, मतलब the pot has already announced that it's going to be weak and unable to go across.
We have to end here. Thank you very much for watching, listening. We will be back with another folk tale.
Our final episode.
And do join us. Please keep sending your comments and feedback. Thank you.